So I'm going to take a little bit of time to go over what was on at least problem number 2 and maybe problem number 3 in this video. And we'll kind of use some of the same thinking techniques to guide ourselves through them that we used in our last one. This is a problem that hopefully you've already read over. I'll let you stop and read it if you need to, but basically what it does is it was on your Unit 2 test. It takes 2 words and it puts the first half of A with the second half of B. So this is another problem that's a method. And you'll notice that this time they've written the method header for you. Here's what you should be able to identify by reading the method header. The result of this thing should be a string, should return a string. And it receives 2 strings, which are going to represent the 2 chunks of the final word that you create. So maybe a first step, if you're getting a method header, is like remind yourself of the return type and parameters, because the parameters are the information that you have to work with, while the return type is what the result actually needs to be. Now I'm going to remind you this of all of the methods that we go over today, but remind yourself of the 3 steps I gave before to writing an effective method. Go back and check the first problem if you need to. When we write any method, we have to define the return type, perform the operation, and return it at the end. So when I'm doing these types of problems, I like to do the 2 easiest types first. I'm going to call this string resulting word because that's what it is. It's the resulting word we're making. And to make a blank string, we just put quotes with a little semicolon and return it at the end. If you're able to do these 2 things on the AP exam, a lot of times problems are like 9 points, and this is like usually 2 of them. It's just writing the variable you want to create and returning it at the end. So our operation is to take the first half of A and the second half of B. Stop for a minute, think to yourself, what method do we have that takes chunks of strings for us like this? It's probably occurred to you that substring, even if you don't remember exactly how it works. And that's really important for us to understand, because I almost guarantee you there will be a problem that requires you to use substring on your final exam. Substring takes a chunk of a word by its index. By its index. And you'll probably remember that there are 2 versions of substring. The type that has 2 numbers and the type that has 1. And they're actually both helpful for us in this problem. And I want you to think about why for a sec. What's the difference between these 2 versions of substring? You can use your Java quick reference, which should be attached to this if you do find it helpful. The substring with 2 indexes takes a chunk, and it's often used to take the beginning of a word. The reason it's used to take the beginning of a word is because that second number here is the index that this thing goes until, and doesn't include number 3. So if I were going to put in substring 0, 3, that would give me the letters of walrus at index 0, 1, and 2. And that is a good way to take the chunk of a beginning of a word, which is something we want to do in this problem. Which string do we want to take the beginning of? That's A. Okay. Next, our second substring only gets 1 number. That's because it goes from this index until the end. So if I were using it on Piglet, which is a 6-letter index, and I went from 3 until the end, the index of L is 3. So that would give me L-E-T. So it seems like using both of these is going to be helpful for solving this problem in particular. The one tricky thing about this is what I'm going to highlight. A and B have the same length, but you don't know the length. But you can use it. You don't know the length, but you can use it. The goal of this is to always take the first half and the second half of something. And we know that we can use that substring to do it. But the question is, what should we put in instead of 3? 3 is not always going to be quite right for us. We want to make sure that it's halfway through the word every single time. Can I define an integer that represents halfway through the word? See and think to yourself if you think you can figure that out. And that's my best guess for how to do it. If you take the length and divide it by 2, that will give you halfway through the word. Now all we have to do is take the first half, the beginning of A. So I'm going to define a string called first half. Which is the first half of A. So we put the name of the string and have it go from 0 until the value of that variable, which will always be halfway through. And if I want to take the second half of the string, all I do is use that b.substring component, which will go from the half mark. Remember that's a.length divided by 2, and take the second half. And then I want to add them in order to the resulting word. This character is super duper useful with strings. If you forget what it means, plus equals mean add these strings, stick it onto the end of the pre-existing string. So far it's blank, but if we add first half and second half to these, it will go ahead and give us the resulting correct answer. Let's take a look at problem number 3. To check if a string is a name, we often check if there is a space in it. A space character is represented by the space in quotes. And this is another method problem where they've given us the method already. So what you want to do is you want to check some sort of string that says something like Mr. Barron. And sees if it has a space in it. There's actually a couple of ways to do this problem. One of them is to use the string method index of, but I want to have you think a little bit about how to loop through the letters and figure it out. Here's the first thing I want you to think about. Remember what we said our 3 steps are? Remind yourself, say them out loud with me if you need to. Define the variable of the return type. Perform the operation. Return the variable. So we know this is going to be a Boolean. I always like to name my Booleans check because they're usually checking something. And I want to return check at the end. And it says return true if there is a space character, return false otherwise. What we're interested in figuring out is which of these is the default. Returns true if there is a space, returns false otherwise. Which of these is the default value here? Think to yourselves. I'm going to argue that it's false, and that this code should spot a space within it and turn true if it's there. Spot a space within it and turn true if it's there. So there's a couple of things we need to do. It needs to check if, at least I'm thinking about the operation, I'm thinking about what steps we can see in here. In my opinion, there's kind of two steps to the operation, and I want to start with number 2. The second is that it returns true if there is a space character. Well, I want to make check true. There's some situation where I want to change it. And this is a string. So the question is, if I'm working with a string, it says check if there is a space character. We're trying to like form a line of code here that will help us do that. I know it's got to be an if statement because it says check if there is a space character in the string. What string method do I have that checks if there is a space character? If there is a particular character, car at. I put my characters here, it's checking if there's a space. I've got word.car@. I know that this is going to check a particular character and see if it is equivalent to a space here. But I don't just want to check one character, right? I have a string called Mr. Barron. I want to check every single one. I want to check the M first. Is that a space? No. I want to check the R first. Next, is that a space? No. I want to check the period next. Is that a space? No. Don't change it to true. But then I finally find that that fourth character there is a space, and I should go through and change this element to true. I want to check every single character inside of this string and check and see if it's equal to true. Ask yourself how we do that. It's a for loop. This is what we learned string characters were good for. So I'm going to go ahead and define my for loop. And I'm going to ask you one more time to think about this. I just defined a counter named X. What does X represent? Remind yourself that X is the index of each string. So I check the car at each index as my for loop loops through them. And if I spot a space, I go ahead and check to see that it's true. Last thing I'll highlight on this one. Why is it 0 to less than word dot length? Remember, our maximum index is always one less than the length. If your word has 10 letters, the first index is 0 and the last is 9. Make sure you're using that less than statement, because if you put less than or equal to instead, your code will freak out and not quite like it. Won't really know what to look at. Thanks for watching this one. Feel free to advance to number 4 if that's helpful.